So,
hello, everyone. It is Jennie and Laurie of AstroPath, and we're here today to talk about Leo season. The sun is about to move into Leo, the warmest, best season of the year.
you're not biased at all. It's
We
fine.
love Leo season. You know, it comes
Mhm.
at the height of the summer. It's an exciting time. So that's what we're here to talk about. And before we get into that, let's just say Jennie is from Hidden Path Astrology. You can find her at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can find me at astrolore.org, and together we are AstroPath. So, like our video, subscribe to our channel, share it, leave comments, all those good things. And, you know, while you're at it, visit our websites. You know, we both provide weekly newsletters, and we both do teaching and consultations. So check out our social media and all the places. All the links are below. Okay. I think I've covered everything there that I need to. How about it, Jennie?
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, we're talking about the sun moving into Leo, which is happening on July 22nd. It's happening at 9:50 p.m. Eastern time. So adjust for your particular time zone. It might be a different day. So just check that out. That's what's happening. And I guess we should talk a little bit about Leo before we talk about the highlights of the season. So I mean, as Laurie mentioned, I mean, Leo it's tied in with the sun. So it's big, bright, radiant. It's a fire sign. It lights up the room. I always think about the hearth fire, everybody gathering around that hearth fire for Leo. So it's a big, bold energy. And its whole goal in life is to radiate out generosity, playfulness, joy, and love. So just that. Yep.
Just that. Yeah. I mean, Leo's ruled by the sun. So it is the center. And you know, one of the things people don't like about Leo is the arrogance of Leo. And you know, the reality is that Leo's purpose is to radiate out, not to radiate toward. So always remembering that any person you meet that has a super strong Leo that has issues around arrogance, or you know, some of the negative sides of Leo, it's simply because it's an immature expression of the sign. Leo really needs to radiate the heat and the warmth and the light outward.
That's right. I mean, I mentioned the hearth fire. I mean, it is literally what heats the house, or the bonfire that people gather around to tell stories, and to get warm. So yeah, really Leo needs to be in that community aspect where it is not being self-absorbed and self-centered and enamored of itself, which is what the problem is. But really it's doing that to shine a light for everybody else. And it holds the archetype of the performer. So if you think about somebody at the front, you know, on a stage doing a great performance, and yes, they are the center of attention, but what are they doing? They're bringing story and joy to everybody else in that audience. And so that is that's actually a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah. And another thing to think about is just the authenticity that has to be brought to this area. Wherever Leo is in your life is a place where, you know, you don't want to be so scared of being overly arrogant that you shut down your light. You know, wherever Leo is, we need to shine that brightly. It just needs to be for the warmth and growth of everybody, not just for the person themselves.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is kind of there's ego states, two ego states, and one is going to be arrogance, like, wow, I'm so great. And then the other one's going to be self-negation, like, oh, I'm so worthless, nobody cares. And those can both come about easily, but they're both ego, because they're both when you are separate from the whole, which is the sort of the reality of things, that we're all part of the human race, we're all part of living on the same planet, you know, and so on. So the mistake comes when you think you're separate, and and then it can go into those two ego states. So that's I think that's a helpful thing to think about. Yeah, I don't know, do you have anything else that you want to add about Leo?
No, Leo's just warm and bright, and yeah, the best side of Leo is generosity and open-hearted warmth for warming others.
Yeah. I know there's one other thing I was going to say. So for everybody watching this, whatever your sun sign is, whatever your sun is in, that sun is going to be in charge of ruling wherever you hold Leo in your chart. So that's the whole rulership thing. We'll explain more about that when we do the personal impacts. But just this is an important area for everybody because it definitely has to do with whatever your sun is. It doesn't matter if your sun is in Taurus or if your sun is in Scorpio. You are still, it still rules over whatever part of your chart holds Leo. So this whole thing is not just Leo season, it's also something very personal to each of you. And we'll, again, get more into that with the personal impacts. I just want to bring that up because it's an important thing to think about.
Absolutely. Great.
Okay. So I guess the next thing is we're going to just very briefly talk about what are the highlights of the season. It's kind of a, I mean, I like the season. It sort of undulates nicely. It's almost like, it is almost like little waves coming in where you have a wave and then it kind of undulates back and softens and then another wave of something of intensity. So it kind of holds that whole pattern. The main keynote, I think, is Venus retrograde. Venus went retrograde right before the sun moved into Leo, like literally 18 minutes before the sun moved into Leo. Venus is in retrograde, so that's a huge piece, and that's going to be that way for the entire season and beyond. A second thing to note is the only thing that changes sign is Mercury. Mercury moves from Leo to Virgo early on in the season. And interestingly, Mercury also is going to retrograde immediately after Leo season. So that's something else to think about. Other than that, I see two other themes. One is Uranus is in the mix. Uranus is in Taurus, squaring everything that's in Leo at some point or another during the season. So that's a big wake up. That's a, wake up to something. And then the final thing I see is just that there's also a lot of earth emphasis. You've got a bunch of things in Virgo and there's some nice trines in earth. So it's some message about, yeah, go ahead and have fun and be big and exuberant, but don't forget that your feet are on the ground. Like, let your feet be on the ground, let that anchor you. So there's these themes around staying anchored while you really are big and enthusiastic and fiery. But that's kind of a quick snapshot of the season.
Yeah, I guess I just want to add, I do think that this season is so preoccupied with the Venus retrograde.
Yeah.
And partly because it just went retrograde, like you said, right before the sun enters Leo, and it's in Leo in its retrograde. So it's really pushing us to, kind of experience this big warmth and dynamic energy of the sun. And yet, I think that whole kind of comparison about the more difficult, arrogant side of Leo and the warmer, brighter, delightful side of Leo is really important to pay attention to the distance between them and where you personally are experiencing your own ability to tap into warmth and exuberance without going into a difficult ego state. So, it's really learning what is of value. Mm-hmm. Yeah, listen to our Venus retrograde video. We made a video about Venus retrograde recently. Be sure you listen to that, because that's really what this whole Leo season is about, as far as I can see. All these other interactions are supporting that and moving that forward as we are reevaluating what our values are in this area of our lives, wherever Leo is for us personally.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly brings in an interesting juxtaposition of like how Leo is such an outward, exuberant fire sign, and you think of that as being extremely extroverted and outward. However, when you really reflect and think about what does fire mean? Where does it come from? And if you think about an individual, because I do a lot of astrology for wellness, so I'm thinking a lot of, the individual spark that fire represents in each of us. So in a certain way, it's embodying that little spark that is our life force in each and every one of us. And I'm bringing that up because the Venus retrograde brings in this like, well, hey, you need to go inwards. And like, what are we talking about? How do you go inwards when you're talking about this bright, shiny fire sign? And really, it's like going inwards to investigate that deep inner spark that is kind of at the core of your spirit. you know, so I kind of have this feeling about it, like it's like tending the inner fires. It's like going into accepting that inward journey of the Venus retrograde as she descends into the underworld to tend your own inner fire, you know, and like sort of, and it's celebratory. There isn't, it's like feed that fire, celebrate that fire, like picture yourself kind of dancing around that fire that is your deep inner spark. I mean, it brings in this kind of mystical component to it, which we don't normally think of during Leo season. But I think it's actually, it's pretty cool. It's an interesting way to work with it. And it certainly dominates the whole season. So
it's really, yeah, it's about exploring that inner fire and understanding and working with it, making sure that it is being supported in the right ways. You know, really exploring how you feed your inner authenticity. I think of, yeah, this Leo area is so much about what is authentic in that core of you, and really getting clear if you're feeding it properly, reevaluating how you're feeding your inner authentic core.
Yeah, and then and side by side with that, of this constant like earth theme that we have threaded throughout is something about, you know, as there's a calmness or a stillness, you also want to work with a groundedness in your within your body. And just as you move about your day, of just thinking about, you know, what would make me feel just a tiny bit more grounded, that could have a huge impact. So that's kind of like the backdrop theme. And I think about elementally how to fire and earth work together. And in the wheel of the zodiac, earth always comes in after a fire sign every single time. So earth comes in after the fire sign to kind of cool it down, calm it down, get grounded, like bring things back down to a practical level. And the fact that those energies are working in tandem throughout this month is a pretty clear theme of go ahead and work with some practical, tangible things, like do the things you need to do to stay centered within your physical body. Is what it kind of comes down to. So, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Are we ready to open up the ingress chart and take a look at it? Okay, let me see.
Do it.
I'm going to apologize in advance to Taurus people. We'll get there. You'll know why I'm saying that, but in advance, I'm saying that.
All right.
Okay, here's the chart. Here's the sun has just entered Leo at the moment, this snapshot.
Lovely. And you'll see right away, there's your Mercury and Venus, Venus retrograde in Leo. So this is the centerpiece. I mean, fire is center anyway, you know, and then this is the centerpiece because it's the most active, energetic thing that's being lit up in this chart.
Yeah. And, you know, for those of you who are kind of new to thinking about these things, you know, Venus and Mercury are never very far away from the sun. So to see the three of them together in one sign is very common because Mercury and Venus are between us and the sun. From our perspective, they're never very far from the sun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely true. No, and I mean, everything else you're seeing in this chart is you've got, you know, a pair of planets in Pisces, a pair of planets in Taurus, a pair of planets in this moment in Virgo. The moon will move pretty quickly out of Virgo there. But a very yin chart otherwise, all earth and water for the most part, for the rest of it. So it's definitely this like bright, shiny fire that's burning in the center of everything. And then these kind of supporting roles of the fire and water. But that's just kind of a little snapshot. Are you ready to talk about the week by week?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, the first thing that happens right after the sun moves into Leo, the first aspect between planets is Mercury squaring Uranus, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so Mercury squares Uranus. That's some sort of a intellectual wake-up call. What are you thinking about that? That's right on the 23rd, the day after the sun moves.
Yeah. I mean, I think internally this could be something that could be kind of anxious, anxiety producing. So, you know, again, use the whole tools of settling down and trying to find some ground with that. I mean, externally, it could be a really powerful conversation that causes growth one way or another for both parties involved in the conversation. I mean, this could be a pretty intense conversation about what's going on in the world.
Yeah,
That's what I think of.
I think just being aware of that and paying attention, anytime there's square aspects are always an effort is required for learning. So if you find yourself in a really difficult or anxiety producing conversation, just kind of, settle yourself down and understand that this is a learning opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the next thing that happens in this first week is July 28th. Mercury is going to move into Virgo. So that is the singular thing that changes sign other than the moon. So that just kind of brings that in. Mercury's preparing for its retrograde cycle again after the end of this season. But I think that's pretty much it for the first week.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of ways that this month seems kind of simple.
Yeah.
Other than Venus retrograde, there's just a lot of simplicity. So yeah, that first week. And I think that Mercury moving into Leo is really a nice thing. Mercury rules Virgo. It's happy to go into Virgo. It's happy to kind of settle down and cool down a little bit after its interaction with the retrograde Venus, which it passes just as it's moving in there.
Yeah. And then after this, once we get to August 1st, we have the full moon. And that is probably the most active day. It is the most active day of the month because that same day you have Mars, which is pretty busy this month, trining Jupiter. So that's a really nice aspect. And then you have Mercury opposing Saturn. That one could be a bit more challenging, bringing in a note of seriousness, or I don't know, there's something more about that. It's a little more somber. And once again, that'll be once Mercury is already in Virgo. So that's Virgo opposed Pisces. So I think of that as acting on the ideal, having the conversation about the ideal, changing your mindset to incorporate, well, what practical things can you do to help out of that ideal?
It's kind of interesting just to think about that, the previous week, Mercury squared Uranus, bringing in some sort of difficult, challenging, or anxiety producing conversation. And then it opposes Saturn. It's sort of like, okay, so we had this big upheaval and now we're getting down into the nitty gritty of figuring out how to really stabilize it. Not necessarily an easy process, but following the Uranus connection, I kind of like how those follow each other.
Yeah, I know, that's interesting. Yeah, and that full moon is in Aquarius. And then after that, there's kind of a few quiet days, not a lot happening on a big level, mostly just moon things until you have the sun squaring Jupiter on August 6th, which is, it's Jupiter. It's a square. So there's something about growth, some sort of challenge, but it's really about, I guess it's the balance of if you go too much, it's excessive. So that's the tricky part. You want to expand, but you don't want to go beyond what your roots can hold. Especially in Taurus. So I think of this as, I don't know, I can't help it. I always think of like a yoga pose where you're trying to stay balanced, but you're also reaching out as far as you can with your arms, but you're trying to balance on one leg. That's what it brings in my mind, that you're really trying to expand, but without toppling over.
It's funny when you work with this stuff, you get these little ideas in your head, little images in your head. When I see Jupiter in square aspect to the inner planets, I think of things like leave your credit card at home because you might overindulge, just being aware of overindulgence, which is, if you stretch that yoga pose too far, you've overindulged and you're going to fall over. If you don't leave your credit card at home, you might overindulge and have to face that bill when it comes in later. And that's the message with the square between these two is just pay attention to expanding too fast, too far. Just kind of keep it
if
cool.
you do fall over, you just pick yourself back up. So this just sort of like just paying attention, exactly what you just said, Laurie. So great. And then I think then we move into sort of the next week. So that's not a whole lot going on that week we just talked about. Then we move into, it's roughly August 8th where we have the last quarter moon in Taurus. And that kind of kicks off like a bit more activity of that week. So you have that quarter moon in Taurus kind of reiterating the earth themes. And then on August 9th, Venus squares Uranus. And that is for the second time. It did it once before it retrograded. This is its retrograde square. So this is a wake-up call. You know, this is an opportunity to, I don't know, really wake up to something that's changing about the way you connect to people, about your value system. I mean, it might also be something like your attachment to beauty and youth. You know, I mean, these are some other themes that can come in with the Venus, or something about money is another possibility. So that's what's happening on August 9th, the same day Mercury also trines Jupiter.
Yeah, I just want to, on that Venus squaring Uranus, I think of that as it's really the first aspect that Venus is making in its retrograde.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, we're working with this Venus retrograde. We're trying to figure out exactly what is it we're reevaluating in our values, in our beliefs about love, money, connection, all of those things. You know, I feel like this moment of this square between Venus and Uranus is really a time when it's going to be very clear. There's like really a wake-up call here. This is what you're learning during this Venus retrograde. So if you're a little confused, what exactly is it I'm working on with this Venus retrograde? I think this is going to really show it to you. I think this is going to make it clear.
Yeah, and this is also where your personal story and your personal values and all those things come into an encounter with the bigger picture, you know, and I can't help but look at things like what's going on with the climate, what's going on with your, you know, your food systems, you know, depending where you live, depending what's happening, there's something coming into focus where you can't just, you know, you can't just live in this separate vacuum, like my value system isn't linked to everyone else's. No, this is waking you up to everybody's impacted by these changes, by this massive changes going on right now on the planet. And like everybody's being impacted by that. So it kind of brings it into that. And you kind of have to bring the two together. How does my personal stuff work with the realities of the outer world? You know, and there's something about that coming in here.
How do these values that I'm reevaluating during Venus retrograde, how does that connect with the larger cultural values?
Yeah, absolutely.
And and the fact that Uranus is in Taurus, it's women, the earth, the planet, the food source, all of that. And here we are, you know, I on the news seeing the changes that the climate is really bringing. And I know you live in Winooski, and I saw some pretty Winooski, Vermont, and I saw some pretty intense videos of right near where you live.
Yep, it's definitely
all connected.
Yeah, and just there's something about it's also like I just had to add one other thing to that. Look around you, you know, use your senses, use your eyes, use your own critical thinking, you know, use your own ear, you know what I mean? Like just kind of tune into your gut, because these are the things that are telling you what's happening. And there's lots of things trying to confuse over that, but just tune into that. There's something about all of those pieces. And interesting that same day Mercury trines Jupiter. I mean, that's that's a really lovely contact of Mercury will be again in Virgo, making a trine to Jupiter. So what a support system. I mean, this is like, okay, this is how you talk about it. This is how you get support around it. This is how you know, recognize that despite all the challenges, there's still these gifts going on. There's still the gift of the present moment, the gift of life, the gift of the conversation you had, maybe with a neighbor you never even talked to before or something, because of what has changed. And this is just part of the reality, you know, things are not black and white, they go together. And so you have this really lovely aspect going on at the same time. So interesting.
And then on the 13th, we've got the Sun conjunct Venus in its retrograde. So this is the midpoint of the Venus retrograde cycle. And, you know, so on the other side of this, we're on the other side of it. We're on our way out of it. We're on our way out of the retrograde. So at this point, you know, you kind of got that wake-up call when it squared Uranus, and now it's kind of digging it in. It's really showing you very clearly what it is on a personal level that you're working with here.
Yeah. And I think it brings in, I was just going to comment, sometimes when you've arrived in that, what would be the sort of the opposite of the apex, like the lowest point of the journey, sometimes things get more dark at that point, you know, like there's less light. I don't mean necessarily dark negative, but just like there's less light in that moment, which is because Venus does completely disappear into the sun at that point. So it's, on one hand, you could be like, whoa, that's super, super bright. But at the same time, it also is obscuring what Venus can show you. So there's something about that piece of the journey that'll be very interesting. So pay attention. As two of our favorite keywords, interesting and pay attention. But, and then a couple days later, the sun will then square Uranus, kind of completing that little segment of the wake-up call. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, yeah, just look for a bit of upheaval that day. Look for a bit or a bit more.
Yeah, and we're also, oh, sorry, Laurie. Yeah.
Nope, that's fine.
I was just going to say we're also in the balsamic moon phase then, because the very next day on August 16th, we have our new moon in Leo, continuing our theme of having new moons at the ends of seasons. And then that very same day of the new moon, it's at 23 degrees of Leo. Very, very, very close to Uranus. I think there's an exact square that day to that. Or obviously it's right the day before, we already mentioned that. Anyway, and then Mars trines Uranus that day. So it's funny because we have all these squares to Uranus, which kind of suggests upheaval and awakening, and and then you have this trine energy where it's like, okay, now you can do something about it. There's this gift of this flow of energy that just comes in, and this could be quite a potent way to take action in some tangible way.
Yeah, that Mars trine Uranus is really a gift of action, coming out of excitement. I mean, that's a really beautiful. Mars is moving quite quickly right now. It is interesting because it starts the season at 7 degrees Virgo, and already here on the 22nd or the 16th rather, it'll be at 22 degrees. It's moving pretty quickly, which is why it's making quite a few aspects this month.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, charging ahead.
Yes, charging ahead.
And then it's after the 16th, there's just moon aspects. There's just, not a whole lot of big things going on until we reach the end of the season, August 22nd. We have Venus squaring Jupiter. And this also, it squared it beforehand, before it even entered its shadow period, way back in June sometime. And then now it's second square while retrograde. And as we talked about, it is a square. So there's that growth. Squares are growth and conflict and crisis phases. At the same time, it's Jupiter and Venus. So this, I just keep thinking something about the support system. When I was looking at this aspect, I was thinking about like a tree, and with the roots of the tree being really broad and wide and growing deeper and broader and making you more sturdy. So there's something about, like, if you are willing to continue to do the work of the Venus retrograde and you take advantage of the square, what you're really trying to do is expand your roots, grow the roots out so that you're even more stable as you do this work. That was the image that came to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's a really good way to look at it. It really, anytime there's an aspect of any sort between Jupiter and Venus, it doesn't matter, it's a square, it's not going to be a huge difficulty. Again, it might lead to a little bit of over expansion, but that growth aspect, that kind of expanding the understanding of what you're learning with this Venus retrograde, that's a powerful little aspect. I like that.
Yeah. And that same day, you have busy little Mars doing something again too. Now Mars is opposed Neptune, and I really like this aspect because I think about Neptune and Pisces is just this big ideal, like this huge idealistic picture, this kind of rosy picture, and then Mars is in Virgo is like, well, what are you going to do about it? Wow, there's people who are struggling right now. Well, I'm going to go and drop some sandwiches off for these people, or I'm going to go and, in my case, help clear some stuff out from a flood. I mean, it really kind of gives you this. What I like about this is just so often there's so much going on and like suffering, and you don't know how to help. And on a day like this, there's a very clear, this is how you can help. This is what you do. Yeah, these people need this.
Yeah, Mars is in Virgo, so it is ready to roll up its sleeves and really do practical effort to support and be of service to others. It really, the opposition brings in the idea of the clarity. You can see what's exactly opposite. And what is Mars? in its service oriented state, it's seen suffering. It's seen this view that Neptune in Pisces is showing it. So yeah, there is a lot about go help out your neighbors that have just gone through a flood or whatever, you know, there are people that you can see that need help. And this is an awesome, powerful time to be of service and help others.
Yeah, I like that aspect. You know, and then the very next day is August 23rd, and that's when the sun follows and goes into Virgo. And a little bit later that same day is when we're going to have the Mercury retrograde, stationing retrograde at 21 degrees of Virgo. So it's really, I mean, it's, yeah, retrograde. And then, so then we'll have the double retrograde for a while. We'll have Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde for, yeah, it looks like, I don't know,
Until
about 10 days
September
or
3rd.
something. Yeah.
Until
So it's
September 3rd when Venus
about,
goes through it.
yeah. So
But yeah, it is interesting that Leo season starts just as Venus turns retrograde, and Virgo season starts just as Virgo's turning retrograde. It's kind of interesting how that's working.
Yeah, and it's gonna, you know, cover some interesting territory in that time. And but I think that kind of covers the week by week. Are you going to show that one other chart, or?
Yeah, I wanted to, I set this up just in case people wanted to see it. Let me see if I can get this. Whoops, just this. If you want to take a screenshot of that, that is everything that is happening in terms of, you know, the 5 main aspects between the planets. And it also shows the moon phases and when there's any ingresses happening. So you can take a screenshot of that if you're interested. And then I think we're ready to move right into the individual pieces.
Yeah, I think let's go ahead and
okay,
get that
so
started.
First of all, we've got those of you that have Aries rising. Oh, your focus is right there in your 5th house. That Leo sun, the Venus retrograde is happening right there in your 5th house. The 5th house being where we go to have fun. It's where we give of ourselves, and where, just remember, Leo, wherever Leo is in your chart is where you are able to express yourself most authentically, regardless of where your sun is, what sign your sun is in. Your sun is able to really express itself through issues of the 5th house.
Yeah, I think it's great with Aries rising. It's, you know, you have fire signs in the very expressive houses, which are the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th. And so the 5th, in a certain way, is just a lovely extension of your identity, your personality. I mean, it really is this way that you offer yourself, just the giving of love in a way that is unfettered and unconditional. It's no wonder that this part of life has to do with children. You know, sometimes your own, but just children in general, like playing with that playful attitude with children, like when you just are super in the present moment. You sit down with like a little toddler, let's say, and play. I mean, it can just be so freeing, right? To just be in that moment and only be worried about that one moment. And so being super creative about how you are being in that moment, and just being excited and exuberant and fully present.
Yeah. So that's where your focus is. Your focus is right in that area. It's where you give of yourself most authentically. And like Jennie said, it's, you know, children can be a big part of this area, whether you have them yourself or not. It's not the hard work of children. The hard work of children does not show up in the 5th house.
No, that's in the 4th house.
Yeah, that's somewhere else. When they're up crying all night, it's not a 5th house issue. This is where you really see yourself reflected in, you know, your most playful side reflected in children, in your creativity. Love affairs are also a big part of the 5th house. So that area where you authentically are giving of yourself, that's where you want to be focusing. That's where your attention is focused this month. And that's where you are also, with Venus retrograde, reevaluating your values in that area.
Yeah, and tending the inner fire of this just wonderful place for Aries rising. So yeah.
Okay, so now before I move to Taurus, I gotta say, well, I'm sorry, Taurus, here you are. Somehow this didn't come out properly. but
Yeah.
I'm gonna draw a little Taurus symbol as best I can here.
Oh, little Taurus.
And we know
Yeah.
that Leo will be here in your 4th house with the sun here.
Yeah.
So actually,
Yeah.
Taurus
So
rising, you got a little special attention.
yeah, so Taurus rising, this brings that Leo season right into your 4th house. So this is family and home. And, also this is ancestry, lineage. This is a very important part. It's a deep, deep part of your chart. It's one of the most private places, which is interesting, kind of an oxymoron to having exuberant Leo here in your 4th house. But it just means that your real spark and your fire really shows up in your home life. So there's something about that. That's what's got your attention throughout Leo season is hearth and home. I mean, just on a simple level. So, yeah. Do you want to say more about that?
Well, regardless of where your sun is, regardless of what sign your sun is in, the 4th house is where you are your most authentic self. The sun rules this area of your life. So, you express your sun wherever your sun, whatever sign your sun is in, it is expressed through this 4th house of home and family. This is an area where right now you want to play. You want to play. You want to really, and with Venus retrograde in there, you're also really reevaluating what you believe is most important, what's most valuable, where your most authentic expression is in your home and family. Yeah, you probably don't want to go away for summer vacation. You probably want to stay home and have outdoor barbecues with your family rather than travel somewhere.
Yeah.
Because that's, you are most expressed there in that 4th house.
Yeah, and it's funny it's almost like I think the Venus retrograde might kind of suit you here because it's a chance to really even go inward, even more inward in your family life. So this really is about tending the inner fires of your family and home life. So it works really well.
Okay,
Yeah.
so now we're going to move on to those of you. Whoops, I got to get rid of. Hold on here a second. Okay, now we're going to talk about those of you with Gemini rising. The Leo is held in your 3rd house. So your attention and your inspiration is coming through your communications. This 3rd house it's really about communication. It's also about your immediate environment. It will hold, as far as relationships, it refers to like your siblings, your neighbors, the people you encounter in your everyday life, the person at the grocery store, whatever. So this is where the sun is shining. This is where you can express yourself most authentically in your communication. With the Venus retrograde in there as well, there's so much attention here. You're really thinking about and evaluating what your values of communication are, what you value in those close to you relationships as well.
Yeah, this really gives you an opportunity to reflect on everything about your communication style, really. And do you feel like you're able to really fully express your authentic self through your communication? That's the question to ask yourself. And that's where some of the work is around the Venus retrograde, is kind of looking at that, because we all say things that we don't mean at times. We all say, and we do things without skill on times when you're feeling really emotional or whatever. So this gives you an opportunity to really work with that part of it, to think about, I don't know, just like how do you feel about the way that you are communicating? And also with Gemini rising, I mean, communication is a big theme. And no matter whatever your sun sign is, so think to yourself, what is my sun sign in? And that sun is governing this 3rd house of communication, no matter what. Like, doesn't matter, it can be any of the other 12 signs or any of the 12 signs. So you can kind of add that into your whole understanding of this area.
Yeah. Wherever Leo is in a person's chart is where they are able to express themselves most authentically. So if you're not clear about your the authenticity of your communication, that's what you're working on and thinking about during this time.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's move on to those of you with, let's see if we can get this to go right. Those of you with Cancer rising.
Yeah, so this puts the Leo season focus into your second house. Second house is not the easiest house in the whole wheel here. It's a place that really deals with your self-worth and your values. So it's like you have this big focus on values. Like what is underneath the way that you feel about yourself? You know, what is underneath the way you use your resources, the way you use your money? Those are things that you're really going to want to consider during Leo season, and really what has your focus. And also because this area is ruled by your sun, no matter what sign your sun is in, this is a theme. This is a topic for you to really work with. And I don't know about you, Laurie, but I see a lot of people with self-worth struggles in my practice. And I think it's part of our culture. It's part of, you know, everything that we're doing at this time. Like it really is a big piece. I see that quite a bit. So has my attention for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because wherever Leo is, this is where you express yourself most authentically. So with Cancer rising, it's interesting to think about that, how you express your authenticity with your money, with your resources. You're really, your focus is so much on really understanding how your self-worth, your own value of yourself is connected to your resources, your financial state. That's an area that, yeah, has your attention very tight at this period of time. And you're really reconsidering thinking about it. Whatever sign your sun is in, it is expressed in this area.
Yeah. And I mean, that Venus underground journey is so much about going in and kind of investigating the inner spark, the chi, the life force that you carry, and just kind of, I think of it in terms of like, it's almost like I want to go into that inner hearth fire and like sweep it out, like clean it out a little bit, like tidy it up. There's something about wanting to just clear things out of the way in order for you to feel tightly connected to how much value you bring to everything. So there's some kind of little process about that I keep thinking about. So, and watch the Venus retrograde video to get more information about it.
Definitely. And there's just something in here about really understanding how you use your resources, to support your own understanding of your own value.
Yeah.
We are not our resources. We learn a lot from them. Okay, so now we're going to move on to those of you with Leo rising. And, you know, this is just so personal for you. If you have Leo rising this season, you know, it's so interesting when you look across the years and think about every summer, this time of year, this is where our attention is brought. So people with Leo rising really shine awfully brightly at this time of year, I would think. You just show up with that sun right there. And that's where your focus is. You are really with this, the sun and the Venus retrograde being in that area. There's an awfully lot of really learning to understand how other people respond to you, how you show up for others. Oftentimes, we can be blind to that. We can be blind to how other people see and understand who we are. And this is a time to really work to get clear about that. I actually, this is kind of random, but if you listen to podcasts, and there's that podcast called Hidden Brain, it's such a good podcast. And there's a whole episode I just listened to yesterday about how we think other people see us. So if you've got Leo rising, listen to that, pull that up. It might be very interesting, because a lot of what you're considering during this time is how do other people see me, and really working with that issue.
Yeah, and I just think with Leo rising, I mean, it's just not to put any pressure on you or anything, but you are kind of a beacon for other people because your sun, whatever sign your sun is in charge of, I mean, essentially is the ruler of your chart when you look at the sun being in charge of the ascendant here because sun rules Leo. So it really, whatever your sun is in, whether it's in Pisces or, something totally different than Leo, it's still with Leo rising going to put ever more focus on that sun and the importance of, I don't know, like clearing things out of the way so your sun can shine brightly is just super important. I think it is that it's a clearing process. It's not something you have to run around and go and do. It's more like something you have to go within and clear away the things that are in the way. And this is perfect for the Venus retrograde to really focus in on this. It's almost just like you're trying to polish away, smudge and detritus and things that are stopping you from shining as brightly as you can. And that's really what you want to be thinking about as you're working through the whole thing.
I like thinking about that. I like the way you worded that. I just had this image that people with Leo rising should go through their house and clean all the mirrors. Because it really is. It's how you show up, and you do. I really like that idea of, cleaning things up and making things shiny. So clean your mirrors, because you really do. Whatever sign your sun is in, it shines brightest through your personality very directly. That's your most authentic self is right. You're wearing it on your sleeve. Okay. Yeah. So those of you with Virgo rising.
Oh, look.
Oh, dear.
Well, there's some
self-branding. That's funny. That's funny.
This is, I was like, I'm just gonna have to out you. This is Laurie's rising sign, so it's perfect there in the picture.
And that was not done on purpose. That's hysterical.
Hilarious. I love it. So with Virgo rising, that means that Leo is in your 12th house. So right off the bat, I just think, gosh, some of your purpose is definitely tied in with dealing with your own subconscious patterns, clearing the way so that you can show the way for other people. I mean, that is a sort of simple statement about this, because that 12th house is behind the scenes, it's tucked away. It's a little bit of, again, that kind of weird juxtaposition of this really bright, shiny energy really hidden away in this 12th house. So whatever you do behind the scenes is going to be tremendously important for how you show up in public and for how you affect other people based on what you do. So really cool. And I mean, with Venus retrograde there too, wow, this is really a time to have a better understanding of what are some of those subconscious things or that I know we like to talk about that information that just kind of arrives fully formed in your brain where you're like, ooh, where did I get that? Like almost like you've channeled something. So there is a big focus on that. Great time to really do the deeper dive and understand this better.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember many, many years ago reading, that wherever Leo is where you shine the brightest, where you can be your most authentic self. And I remember thinking, well, how the heck does that happen in the 12th house? But I remember, just thinking about the 12th house as being where you kind of go alone, and it's interesting to think about closing the door from the rest of the world and, dancing on your own in the dark. It is sort of in this hidden internal place where you're able to shine. And cats are a Leo creature.
This is all perfect how this is playing out with the cat coming into the video.
Yeah.
Great.
So so shine behind the scenes and let it leak out from there.
Yeah, I mean, this also, if you're on the fence about maybe getting some support around this process, this Leo season is going to be a really good time to get clear about what you might want to do. Like maybe in the longer term, do you want to take some sort of retreat? Do you want to, I mean, there's a lot of different medicine retreats out there these days to kind of help you shine a light into this area and help give you guidance so that you can be of guidance to others. So, yeah. Look it up.
The 12th house is, I think of the 12th house very much in kind of two parts. There's the spiritual side of it, and then there's the deep psychological side of it. So you're exploring those levels, both of those levels, and how they connect.
Yeah.
And okay,
Right.
so I
Cool.
think we're ready to move on. Hopefully my picture will disappear after this. Yep. Oh, wait. Libra.
There we go. Back. Oh, look, it was perfectly done, Laurie.
Okay. So if you've got Libra rising, Leo season, the energy, the focus is showing up in your 11th house. You want to really pay attention to the community that supports you to shine. Because where your most authentic self is expressed is in community. So this is an area where you really want to pay attention. What is your community? Who does support you? And when I think about that 11th house, it's not necessarily your friends. I mean, it can involve some of your friends, but it's really kind of more like-minded people who support you to your goals and desires. And this is where, no matter where your sun is, this is where you authentically show up the most clearly.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking about just the fact that it's Libra rising. And, you know, sometimes one of the challenges around Libra is just wanting everything to be really, I don't know, kind of friendly and almost leaning towards shallow because they want it to just be all like nice and work out. And I think that maybe having Leo in the 11th house, what it's asking you to do is really have an understanding of who authentically supports you to be, or maybe a better way to put it is who supports you to be your most authentic self. Like really, like when you clear away the fluff and you clear away the whatever the other things are, just getting really deep in touch with like, I really need these people to support me. You know, it's kind of like opening the gates, like to receptivity, like being receptive to other people supporting you, and just really have an understanding of like, but who's supporting you to do what, and who are the people who really, really support you to be your most authentic self, and like really show up in a way that has depth, and unconditional giving of love, like not for more kind of superficial reasons. So that's kind of what came to my mind when I thought about this one. So it's a good juxtaposition to think of.
Yeah, consider what your community is. Maybe there are things that need to be changed with that Venus retrograde, and watch the Venus retrograde video.
Yeah.
It'll give you
And
a
just,
lot
you know,
more.
tend that inner fire. I mean, that's what I keep thinking about with Venus retrograde. Tend the inner fire of, you know, clearing the blocks to your receptivity so that you can be truly receptive to what will support you in your life path. So, yeah.
Okay. So now moving on, we're going to go to those of you with Scorpio rising.
And so Scorpio rising, that puts that Leo focus right in your 10th house of career. As you can kind of see, sort of obviously, this is the highest point of your chart. So this really is where you show up in public. Like this is what you bring to the table. This is the bright, shiny that people see of you in your work life, in your profession, and just how you most like your social reputation, like how you show up. So there's something about this season that's bringing the focus right onto your work. What is going on with your work? What do you need to look at? With the Venus retrograde also operating in the same area of life, there's a deep dive needed to sort of think about what really does help kindle the inner spark. Does my work inspire me? Does it not inspire me? Like just being willing to look at those questions and see what comes up, see what emerges out of those kinds of questions. Because either way, it might take you further along in a path you're already on, or it might allow you to make a change. It might allow a switch. So just those are the kind of questions, like the values. What do you value in your workplace?
Right. And Leo itself being, ruled by the sun, it's about inspiration and purpose. And so with Scorpio rising, are you inspired by your career? Wherever Leo is, you really need to feel inspired. Your sun, regardless of what sign your sun is in, it needs to be able to express itself fully in this area of your life. And if you're not feeling that, well, then Venus retrograde has a big job to do over these weeks. So find inspiration in your career. Look for it. It is really trying to find you.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny with the Scorpio rising, right? Because Scorpio is like wants it to be so intense and have all this depth, but then it's like, shows up as really bright like in public. So there's something to be resolved around that issue too. And just, yeah, as you said, Laurie, like needing your work, well, really to have some depth and have some real meaning to it too. It can't just be sort of frivolous. There's definitely a chapter about that. So.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to those of you that have Sagittarius rising. This puts the Leo season focus, the Venus retrograde as well, right there in your 9th house. Wherever Leo is, we want to really make sure that we are able to express ourselves most authentically in this area of our lives, regardless of where our personal sun is. We need to be able to feel inspired and driven in this area. And the 9th house is about your worldview. How do you see? What is your greater, bigger understanding of the world? And are you able to express that? So 9th house worldview, how do we develop our worldview? Through education, through travel, through understanding other cultures, bigger patterns. Those are the areas that are really calling for your attention right now. This could, it's summer, it's Leo season, maybe it's maybe for you this is about travel, maybe this is for you about planning a new study coming up once Leo season is over. Maybe you're thinking about that, but this is an area of great inspiration. Look for it in your worldview.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny. Anybody with any fire sign rising, it means that your kind of fire signs are in the most expressive parts of your chart. Like that's it kind of sort of lends itself to like, well, you're a fiery person because you have this setup, you might have other planets and other things, but it does kind of lend itself to that. And I think it's really lovely having that generous, playful sign of Leo in the place of your worldview. And I mean, I think this is also absolutely a placement of somebody who can also be that teacher for someone else who's going to be able to accumulate their life experiences and then offer that as a teacher to their own students. And also this is a person who's always going to be a student as well with the Sagittarius rising. So there's a really nice flow in that 9th house. And of course, whatever sign your sun is in, it's going to really express itself in this 9th house of worldview and wisdom. So it has 12 different flavors, it can come through in this area of life, but that it definitely suggests that, I don't know, having a lot to offer as well as part of your life path to others. And with the Venus retrograde, it gives you a chance to really do a deeper dive on that, get some clarity around what is the inner spark that really drives you and motivates you, and do some clearing around that and see what comes of it.
Yeah, really. I'm just thinking about that Venus retrograde in there, really reevaluating your place as a student or a teacher. It's interesting. I like that you brought that in, the teacher student connection with this setup, because it is very strong. Sagittarius rising and then that Leo in the 9th house. That's a beautiful placement, really.
Yeah, I know, works well. So okay.
Let's move on to those of you with Capricorn rising.
Yeah, so with Capricorn rising, it's another one of those tricky places where it puts the bright, shiny Leo sun in the 8th house. And the 8th house is kind of the house of the occult and the secrets and the kind of the things that are submerged a little bit below the surface, that are what is really pushing everybody else around you. I mean, for example, it's just like where you kind of bump into other people's baggage. We talk about that a lot. But there's always that point, you have a relationship with somebody, and then next thing you know, you're bumping into each other's stuff underneath, and suddenly things get a lot harder, and you're scratching your head going, is this how it's supposed to be? And I would think with Leo in the 8th house, that's a constant question throughout life that maybe has been raised again and again. So during this Leo season, you really have an opportunity to investigate that. Like, how do you really have a wonderful way of shining a light into some hidden places that could be really helpful, provided you've done that kind of ego work of like making sure that you're shining the light for others. You're not just shining it for yourself, that you really are able to reach in those more generous and playful places of Leo. But kind of goes really well with the Venus retrograde though, because the Venus retrograde is saying, hey, you need to go look and see what's under the hood. You need to go down and just kind of check in with how bright is your light able to shine, like underneath all this, and then what kinds of things might you need to do to tend to that fire so that it continue to shine brightly and generously.
Yeah,
Oh.
I like thinking about, no matter where your sun is in your chart, no matter what sign it's in, you are able to most authentically express yourself in this area that holds Leo. So, your expression really has to come through where you bump into other people's values.
Mhm.
This is really a suggestion of someone who really can learn a great deal and express a great deal of themselves as they interact with other people's deep, painful issues. This could be a great setup for a therapist or someone, who really has to set boundaries and understand how to work in deep levels with other people. So that's the area where your attention is drawn right now, how you're working and engaging with other people's on a deep level.
Yeah, and Laurie, is what's coming to me as you're saying this too is I'm going to guess that this isn't a very easy process. I mean, because Capricorn rising is quite serious, and then you put the sun needing to be in that 8th house. This is it's challenging, it's hard. So that's why, like, as you work through those experiences, that's why you really have so much to offer. This is the chart of somebody who's really had to do that work around letting their sun shine out.
Oh. Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on now to those of you with Aquarius rising. This puts Leo right in your 7th house. So where you shine the brightest and where your attention is drawn at this time of the year is in your intimate one-on-one partnerships. This could be your spouse, your business partner. The 7th house includes all one-on-one kind of equal partnerships. So think about that. That's where, it's within those kind of relationships that you are able to express your generosity and your most authentic self right there in relationships. Isn't that interesting? Because with Aquarius rising, there's an element of your personality that seems very detached. But when you are one-on-one in a partnership with someone, that detachment isn't what they are encountering. They're encountering you in a very authentic, playful, lovely space. But you're really, with the Venus retrograde in there right now, you're really evaluating how authentic your expression is in those kind of relationships.
Nice. Yeah, what's coming to mind for me with the Venus retrograde, I was just thinking about, I don't know, there's a little bit of this thing of like, if you're looking for a partner, you got to go out and find somebody. You got to go out and sort of pursue them and find somebody. And this is bringing in mind for me the opposite, where actually what you need to do is think about what kind of partner do you want to be? Like going in and sort of having a deeper understanding of what you bring to the table in a partnership rather than going and looking out there for someone. And that you're really working, even though it's a very young outward sign, what you really need to do is kind of uncover like what would draw people to you, and it's sort of countercultural to think about that. But that's where the work is, and that's what the Venus retrograde goes in. It brings me back to that thing I said earlier about having to polish, like kind of clearing away the things that are actually blocking you from having satisfying partnerships, whether you're partnered or not. And this again can be in other realms, but just in the intimate partnership. So this is a really good time to sort of just clear away the cobwebs of whatever the old constructs are, how you think you are, and just like let it be fresh and new. And that's the Venus retrograde work. So
yeah, you really need to bring your full authentic self to your partnerships. And polish that lens. I like that whole vision, that whole idea. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to those of you with Pisces rising.
Yeah. So the Pisces rising, this Leo season is very firmly on your habits and, daily practices, all those things that keep you going. through your routines, you know, the week by week, the day by day thing that you need to do, the way you eat, whether you're getting enough sleep, you know, whether or not you have some sort of meditative or calming practice that helps you, which I hope you do with Pisces rising, because it's quite a sensitive rising sign. But that's where this Leo season, your attention is firmly in that sixth house. And I encourage you again to watch the Venus retrograde video, because it goes more into what you can do in the sixth house with the Venus retrograde. But essentially it's about going in kind of on the underworld journey to understand like which practices you have serve you, which ones are working for you, which ones really are promoting your ability to shine and unconditionally love others. Those are the things you're going to want to look at, is how can you perhaps adjust some habits so that you can shine more brightly, so that you can really radiate out your energy to others as well. So those are the questions that you're going to be addressing during this Leo season.
I like thinking about, you know, wherever Leo being the area where you bring your most authentic self to. So, you know, in thinking about that, bringing your most authentic self to your day-to-day routines, your day-to-day rituals, what you do, how you support your health and your well-being, and reflect that out to others. I don't know, as you were talking about that, I was just thinking this would be a great placement for someone who's a yoga teacher or a nurse, or, you know, some way that those caring practices that they bring their authentic self into that area.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on too, because with Pisces rising, it speaks to a life direction of wanting to help with suffering, wanting to make things ease suffering for people, and wanting to be there for that. So I think that could be really spot on. Yeah, that's great. And it doesn't matter what sign your sun is in, it's still going to be in charge of that sixth house area to shine its energy out. So
your focus is there, your attention is there, you are learning a deeper understanding with Venus retrograde there, and you're polishing the lens. I love how you talk about polishing the lens with the Venus retrograde. I think that's such a great way to think about it.
Yeah, cool.
Because all of us, you know, wherever this is happening, you know, over the course of time, those lenses get smudged and messy. And I think, you know, finding ways to think about these retrogrades that really supports growth.
Yeah.
You know, I remember in early days of learning astrology thinking, oh my God, retrogrades, these personal planet retrogrades are so horrible. The more time goes by and the more I look at this stuff, I love the retrogrades. We get so much from working with the retrogrades.
Yeah, I mean, they really speak to just like sometimes you have to hit pause and take a step back and look at some things. And you know, if you're just charging through your life, you never do that, and things just go by like that. And like these are really necessary for filling yourself up, for being available for others, for being receptive, you know, for following the path of your life. I mean, I totally agree. So yeah.
Okay, well,
Fabulous.
I come to an end there, and thank you everyone, and we'll be back with another video soon. Is there anything you want to say before we end?
No, just thank you everybody, and thank you, Laurie.
Okay, thank you, Jennie. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.